I'd like to welcome you and invite you to really enjoy this first session of the year. I appreciate you being here today. This is a very different experience from last year's symposium. As you recall, for many of you who attended last year's symposium, we had about 150 people in Melbourne and had some absolutely remarkable presenters and some presentations. And I think the experience for everybody was very, very productive. Given that Studiosity is an agile and flexible organisation, we believe that it was important to connect with our partners and other interested groups to continue the conversations about supporting students first. Our result is a suite of webinars over the next few months. The upside is that more people can engage with issues given that we set attendance limits to face-to-face participation. You don't have to get on a plane or public transport and all the other challenges of getting from A to B. The downside, of course, you can't have those bump into each other conversations, coffee or lunch, and it's probably difficult to meet new colleagues. Let's hope that next year we'll be meeting at North Sydney at ACU. We've put together an exceptional program of speakers, experts and leaders in their field who generously have agreed to give their precious time to talk and engage with us. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a challenge for all of us. Working differently, isolation, exhaustion, and anxiety about staying healthy. Social distance is forever embedded in our language, as is Zoom meeting. On a positive note, it's demonstrated that as a sector, we can respond quickly and that our institution's commitment to student learning is central. That courses were put online quickly has surprised many of us. A colleague of mine in Sweden told me that the university put all its courses online over a 2-week period, something as Vice-Chancellor she'd been trying to do for the last 5 years. However, learning is not just about delivery of content, it's about recognising students learn in different ways, that learning is a social as well as intellectual activity, and the application and translation of content is important. So, some housekeeping issues before I introduce today's keynote. I'll ask you to use the question and answer function if you have questions, and where some of my Studiosity colleagues will be helping to answer questions quickly. I'll also address core themes and questions at the end. The primary focus of the symposium is students first, is still core, despite or because of the goings-on of 2020. Of course, driving and developing new practice in the sector isn't new. Your keynote today and colleague of mine, Professor Denise Kirkpatrick, Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Western Sydney University, demonstrates this university's long-standing focus on the student experience. With a focus today on the university's internal review on their on-demand literacy and numeracy support service, Studiosity, on student satisfaction, retention, and academic performance. What I'd like everyone here to reflect on are the following questions. How does your student support get measured? Should student support be measured? Should a third-party partnership or service be involved? And given our recent experience, what can we stop doing and what can be improved? As you all know, Denise is recognised internationally for her scholarly contributions to the fields of technology-enhanced learning and quality assurance in higher education. Without delay, hello Denise, and thank you.
Hi Judith, and thank you very much, and thank you very much for that introduction. I would like to begin this morning, particularly for my Australian colleagues who are joining us via the webinar, I'd like to begin by acknowledging country and acknowledge that for at least the Australians of us here today, we're meeting on the lands of many different nations. I'm joining you today from the land of the Darug people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also acknowledge that they are the traditional custodians of the lands on which all of us in Australia are meeting today. And I understand I have some New Zealand colleagues here, and I know that in your own way you will be doing your own acknowledgement. I'd also really like to thank Jack and Judith, but all of the team at Studiosity for this introduction. Those of you who have been regular attenders at the Students' First Symposia may well be getting a bit sick of hearing about Western Sydney, I think, but we're really proud of the long relationship that we've had with Studiosity. I'll talk a little bit today about that relationship with Studiosity, because it in part tells you more about Western Sydney, the university, but it also tells you a lot more about where our priorities lie. My presentation today will cover several things. I'm not going to assume you all understand a lot about Western Sydney University, so I will give you a little bit of background about us. But I will also talk to you about the ways in which we've been using the Studiosity services, but also to share with you some results of a reasonably large evaluation and review that we conducted, and the data that we used and some of our findings. Today, purposely, I will keep it quite high level, but I do think the findings that I'll be presenting from Western Sydney will probably cause all of you to reflect on what you know about the use of Studiosity in your own institutions, and perhaps think about some other questions that you might like to find the answers out to. So I know Judyth posed you, I think, 3 or 4 big questions to reflect on throughout this. And I will say throughout all of this, I'm sure you'll be going, I would have gone about this evaluation slightly differently. So I'll put some caveats around what we did in our evaluation as well. I should also, and it gives me great pleasure as well, to acknowledge the contribution of all of my colleagues at Western Sydney University. And I know there are quite a few of you out there joining me in the webinar today. It's the colleagues who work with our students. I'd like to acknowledge the work of Professor Betty Gill, who led the evaluation for us, but also my colleagues, particularly Simon Barry, Simon Bedford, and Pete Maggs, all of whom are central to the provision of our Studiosity services to our students here at Western. Judyth, not surprisingly, began today with lots of references to the situation in which we find ourselves. Working from home, learning from home, a pretty rapid adjustment to some very different circumstances for many of us and for very many of our students. Student support at a time such as this just becomes even more critical. Today, we're talking very much about academic support for students, but I know all of you are as concerned as I am about the extent to which we can provide all kinds of support to our students as they're learning in new ways, but as they're dealing with a whole set of new complexities, anxieties, and challenges. And it is certainly the use of academic support services that can actually reduce some of that anxiety for our students, as well as helping them to perform even better. So we've had a long relationship with Studiosity, or what was originally your tutor here at Western Sydney University. Around about 20 years ago, the university and your tutor partnered, and they partnered to provide the services of your tutor at the time to young people in the Western Sydney region. It was part of the university's outreach, and it was very much part of the university's deep commitment to the people of Western Sydney. Over time, our relationship's grown, it's expanded, it's moved from the provision of your tutor through local libraries and to school students in the region, to providing it to our own students, to our students of Western Sydney University College, and more recently to the students of the university. For us, your tutor and now Studiosity forms a very, very important part of a network of services and a network of support that we provide for our prospective students as well as our current students. So I did say I'd give you a little bit of background to Western Sydney University. I know some of you know us well, and particularly my colleagues know us pretty well, and my colleagues at Studiosity know a lot about Western Sydney. And in some ways you are part of a lot of the work that we do. However, I'm not assuming that my interstate or international colleagues know very much about us. So Western Sydney University, we're a medium-sized university, around about 48,000 students. You'll see we have around about 4,000 staff members. We're a multi-campus institution. We are fundamentally and have traditionally been an on-campus institution. While, like all universities, we've engaged in flexible learning and we've done a lot of work flipping the classroom, we've been fundamentally an on-campus institution. We are also predominantly a domestic institution. Most of our students are Australian. And we have, as part of our mission, the service of the people of Western Sydney, the region. Our 10 or 10 plus campuses throughout Western Sydney are all in the Sydney metropolitan area. We have a very small campus in Ho Chi Minh City as well. But what I'm going to talk about today is fundamentally our domestic campuses and the students who attend. Western Sydney, as many of you know, is a very diverse region. It's diverse from a socio-economic point of view, but it's also extremely diverse from the point of view of the cultural background of our students. At Western, more than 60% of our students are first in family. They're first generational university students. Around about 40% of our students speak a language other than English at home, and at last count, they speak around about 150 different languages at home. More than 40% of the students who enrol in our undergraduate degrees are non-current school leavers, so it tells you that we aren't necessarily a very traditional undergraduate cohort. And we have one of the highest rates of low SES participation of Australian universities. So it tells you a little bit about Western. I will say something else about Western, and we take our commitment to the people of Western Sydney very seriously. But we're also very excited to be in one of the fastest growing economic regions in Australia. And as a consequence, it has given Western Sydney University a fantastic set of opportunities and opportunity for growth. But back to the provision of Studiosity. As I said, we began with offering online tutoring to high school students in Western Sydney and the college, and this was part of the university's widening participation program. However, in 2016, when I was looking at the ways in which we could provide more support for our students, it was pretty obvious to me that while we could provide typical on-campus support services on our own and within our own resource base, it wasn't going to be possible for the university to provide the level and the quality and the consistency of quality of student support on our own. So we were looking for a partner. Our long relationship with Studiosity made Studiosity, your tutor, the first choice for us. So in 2016, we began our first offering of the online tutoring support services to our undergraduate students. I say our undergraduate students, I should point out we also offer the Studiosity services to our postgraduate coursework students. So that gives you a sense of the range of the students who can access Studiosity's support. So we began in spring session. So when I talk a little bit about some of the data that we've been looking at, it is only a half year of data, and we recognise, of course, that those aren't actually, while they're first years, they won't have the same set of characteristics as commencing students would normally have. So you'll see I'll be looking at data from the second half of 2016 as well as 2017 and 2018. We have always taken a capped approach in terms of allowing our students access. We've done that from an equity perspective. We believe we would rather limit the amount of access our students have to Studiosity than give a very small number of students an unlimited access. And I'll talk a little bit about the extent to which the service is used as well. You'll see from the timeline, one of the things that I should mention that took place in 2019, for us at Western, Studiosity is part of a suite of support services. It's a blend, so Studiosity contributes in to a blended range of support for our students. We have a range of on-campus study support that have been offered by our library, and we offered them under our brand of Study Smart. In 2019, we incorporated into a single brand all of our support services under Study Smart so that students could identify them much more easily and so that they could access them much more easily. In 2019 as well, we established a Studiosity advisory group within the university. And it might seem like a no-brainer and you might all wonder why we hadn't done it before, but for some reason we hadn't. I was really pleased to establish the Studiosity advisory group, and it's a group that has representation from all of our stakeholders across the university and the Studiosity team. And it's provided a fabulous platform for collaboration, for discussion of issues, for resolution of issues, and for talking about further developments. So talking about further developments both to the product, but also to the ways in which we use Studiosity on campus and with our students, and the ways that we integrate it with everything else that we do for our students. One of the really critical decisions that did occur was at the end of 2018. We'd been using Studiosity at the university, but we'd been doing it on a year-by-year basis. We didn't have any continuity of funding, so we didn't have any confidence that we were always going to have the service to make available to our students. So it was a very, very important decision in 2018 to commit to longer-term funding and a longer-term partnership with Studiosity. That allows us, I think, greater confidence in doing longer-term planning. It's allowed us, I think, to develop a much stronger partnership as well. I'm having trouble moving my slides along. Let me see what I can do about it. I might see if somebody at Studiosity's end might be able to help me out. Oh, I've got it. I've got it under control again. I talked about the fact that Studiosity is part of a suite of services, support services that we make available to our students. And this is just a little network that shows you. We believe that these are all interconnected, and we hope that students will move seamlessly between the on-campus support services that we provide, use of our Study Smart librarians, use of our Study Smart support officers, our Study Smart advisors, and our colleagues at Connect Live and the written feedback service of Studiosity. We believe that it is really important that we provide our students with a range of different ways of accessing support. We certainly understand, and the data that I'll be sharing with you indicates just how important that extended access to the online support services has been for our students, that convenience and the flexibility. But we think it's also important that we give our students a choice. As I said, we're a multi-campus institution, so we also think that being able to provide extensive student support via a range of services online has also been really helpful to our students. A lot of our students, like many of you, our students all have almost full-time jobs. Even our full-time students, many of them do live quite a distance from campus. So getting onto campus to access some of the on-campus support services, particularly at that time of critical need, isn't always possible for our students. So this suite of support, I think, brings everything together. It's integrated for our students. They don't have to search around to find the support, but they can access what they need. So as I said, it's not an isolated tool. We make Studiosity available both through the university website, but also through our standard course platform, which we call Views. We use Blackboard as our learning management system. As I said, our Studiosity advisory group is the source of regular collaboration between Studiosity and us, and I think it's making a really valuable contribution to continuous improvement of support for our students, but also the ways in which we work together with Studiosity and provide a high quality support services for our students. We're getting better and we're doing more promotion to students and staff. And that's the piece we haven't done much evaluation of. And if I'm highlighting something we need to look at more in the future, it is certainly that, that promotion, the way we make this discoverable to students, but the way we work with our staff in particular to assist them to make this really explicit to students and easily accessible for students. Not surprisingly, we are seeing that the importance of online service provision for all of our student support services has become increasingly important as we've introduced social isolation and we've worked through lockdown with students learning from home. It was a great relief to me to know that as soon as we moved our students to learning from home, they would immediately still have access to Studiosity as the online student support, while we transitioned as quickly as we could the range of our on-campus support services to students. So I'm talking, I know, to the converted. I'm talking to people I know who understand just how important it is for us to provide an extensive range of support to all of our students. Learning support, pastoral care, and a whole range of generic and specific academic and study support for our students. It's a really important contributing factor to progression, retention, and completion. Something we're all concerned about. And yes, we're all concerned about it because we should be. And yes, we're concerned about it because increasingly it's one of the performance indicators against which universities are measured. But we are also concerned about it because it is absolutely centrally part of our responsibility as a university to ensure that every student who studies with us has optimised opportunities to be successful. We do a lot around the way we teach, the way we construct our curriculum, the way we create learning experiences, and the way we assess our students. But we know that many students require additional support, whether they're commencing students making the transition from secondary school to university, whether they're students for whom university learning is something with which they're unfamiliar, or whether it is also, and unfortunately in some cases, addressing some of the shortcomings in the way we provide university education to our students. We know that completion rates are still a challenge for the sector, but we also know that there are a myriad of reasons that impact on completion rates. We know there are also multiple reasons that impact on students' retention and progression rates, and they aren't all academic. However, I believe, and I think all of you do too, that we do have a responsibility to do as much as we can to facilitate our students' academic success. And the provision of academic and learning support is something that does make a difference. While we all believe it makes a difference, we know it makes a difference, and some of the data that I'll show you now indicates the extent to which it has made a difference for our students. So and some of you may be asking the question, because I'm going to tell you that we decided to do this review and evaluation of Studiosity after we'd committed to a longer term relationship with them. And many of you will think, well, shouldn't you have done that before you went into a longer term relationship? We'd always done some light touch and some informal evaluations. And of course, when we made the decision to enter into a longer relationship and partnership with Studiosity, we did one of those very standard evaluations. But when we knew that we had a continuity and a commitment of service and certainty about it, we decided that in order to optimise our use of Studiosity and to really leverage as much as we could from the services that Studiosity provides, we thought it was important to get a benchmark and to find out exactly what it was. So to get a better sense of who was using Studiosity, to find out the factors that were influencing students in their use and the patterns of their use of the services provided by Studiosity, and also to see what impact Studiosity was having on academic performance and student retention. So we did a detailed review of the usage data across half of 2016, 2017 and 2018. We did a detailed review of student feedback responses that have been collected by Studiosity, and I certainly thank Studiosity very much for the access that you gave us to all of the data that you've been collecting. That was an important component to giving us a very detailed view of students' use of Studiosity. We also included some consideration and some comparison of some factors that we thought might make a difference. ATAR for students who had entered the university with an ATAR, their GPA as they progressed through the university, and to see if there was any relationship between things such as ATAR and GPA with the ways in which students used Studiosity, the extent to which they used Studiosity services and the outcomes. And we also were able to do, because as I said, this is part of a suite of support, a comparison with our face-to-face services as well. There are so many limitations around this study and the data that we used, and I acknowledge those. But nonetheless, they've given us a much more in-depth, so a much deeper understanding of how the Studiosity services are being used, how we can use them better, but also some of the factors that really do seem to be making a difference. And of course, I think, like any good evaluation, it answered some questions, but it asked a whole lot of other questions as well. We acknowledge in 2017, a fairly big science unit at the university embedded the use of the written feedback aspect of Studiosity in one of the assessment pieces. This was to encourage students to use it. It was to encourage students to get feedback on their written work with a view to students improving their work before they submitted it. But it had some conflating effects and it also raised a different set of issues, I think. And it's important also to acknowledge that generally this is an opt-in service. So students who are using, while we can promote Studiosity, students who are using Studiosity effectively self-select. So that would, we can certainly debate the different sorts of characteristics that might come with a group of students who self-select to use a support service. And I'll talk about how that might play itself out differently in the two different services as well. Thought I might just show you a little bit. This was just showing you the usage patterns of Studiosity services over 16 to 18. And you'll see that, so there are some differences in use, but quite high levels of use. What we've seen is generally an increase in use over the last few years. And I should say, I'm sure people are going to ask the question about, and what about first semester of this year? So we've certainly seen an increase in the use of Studiosity's online support services this year as our students have been learning completely online and completely from home. But one of the things that we also have noticed this year is we haven't seen as many new users, and we suspect that has something to do with our capacity to promote the service to students, and it is something that we're currently actively investigating. If I talk about a little bit about the findings at a very high level, the students in our School of Nursing and Midwifery were by far the largest user group. I should say our School of Nursing and Midwifery is also a very, very big school in the university. We have over 4,000 students studying with that school. However, our students in nursing and midwifery as well, if we look at some of the characteristics of those students, again, high level of non-school leavers, a very high level of women, a very high level of students for whom they are first in family. Students in our school, what was then computing, engineering and mathematics, were the smallest user group. I think a range of reasons that we might think of for that. We did a lot of analysis around some of the common characteristics of the users. So what did we find? The most common users were our undergraduate students, they were our domestic students, they were our commencing students, they were the younger students, so under 24 years of age, female and English speaking. So that was numerically, but when we looked at the proportion of users, it was older females, again, commencing, but postgraduate as well in this case, international students, and language at home, a language other than English, so they represented the highest proportion of our users. In 2018, 3/4 of the users of the service were undergraduate students. And again, probably not surprising. I think they do engage differently with the university, and I think we probably had more opportunities to promote use of the service to those students. Again, 80% of the students were our domestic students. That raises some questions for us. It's kind of representative of our breakdown of international versus domestic students, but one might have made the assumption that international students would be high users of support services such as Studiosity, and particularly because we know that for many students there is a certain comfort in being able to access support services online where they can spend more time composing their responses. And again, half of them came from homes where English was not the primary language. We did, as I said, looked at students' ATAR rank. So where we had an enter score for our students, around 2/3 of the students who were using Studiosity had an entry score to the university that was 70 or below. And again, that's kind of proportionate as equal to the size of the non-user cohort that had the same rank. We were really interested to see whether students who came in with what might be seen as a slightly more challenging enter score, we would expect that they would probably access these services to a higher level than students who came in very well prepared or at least quite competitive. But I'll share some of that with you too, I hope. As I said, we've seen that the use of Studiosity increased year on year. And generally the number of individual students using the service increased between 2017 and 2018. We were interested in whether students were using both. We thought that particularly either students who we would think of as high need would use every service available to them. But we also thought that some of those very high achieving strategic students would make use of every support service available too. And it was interesting, and our findings aren't the same as I know some other universities, but only between 3 and 5% of the users were using both our on-campus services and the online services through Studiosity. I should say, and I probably should have said this at the outset, consistently really high levels of student satisfaction with the services. We did see an improvement in both grade point average and progression rates from students who were making use of Studiosity support services. And we saw that there were actually higher GPA rates, slightly higher, for those who used Studiosity compared to students who didn't. And so were progression rates. Our retention rates were also higher, but again, we've got a few anomalies in the data. But there's a general trend and a direction of travel. Certainly supportive, certainly encouraging our students to use Studiosity and their use of Studiosity, does make a difference. We did see some differences both in performance among those students who used written feedback versus those who used the Connect Live service. One of the other things that we did notice, and this is slightly more than anecdotal, and that is that many of us always assumed that services such as Studiosity would be highly used by students at need. Students who were at risk, the ones we would normally think of in that way. We found that Studiosity was used by those students, but it was also used quite extensively by a number of very high achieving, high performing students. Those students who were very achievement oriented, but also, I'm going to say, very strategic. And when we talked to them about their use of the Studiosity services, they were very strategic. And these students used the written feedback more than the Connect Live. Some ways we could interpret that are that these students actually are better at time management, that they're better at planning their approach to their work, that they give themselves enough time to get some feedback and to respond to it. And again, anecdotally, when we talk to the students, what they say to us is, well, there's services available. I want to do as well as I can. Why wouldn't I get feedback? And why wouldn't I do everything I can to maximise my performance? So again, if we kind of bring that level of interpretation to bear, we might ask some questions about, the students who just use Connect Live. And the students who just use Connect Live do tend to use it when they're desperate often. They use it at the last minute, and they don't always give themselves time to respond to it. I did mention earlier that we used in 2017, one of our units embedded the requirement that students use the written feedback. What we did find was that students weren't necessarily very organised when they did that, and they left it till the last minute, and they didn't actually give themselves time to respond to that feedback. So again, we know there is a lot in here around the characteristics of users, their motivation, their own strategies themselves as learners. But I do think what's really important through all of this is their motivation and their engagement. So using any of the Studiosity online services just gets the students engaging more frequently, and more deeply. As I said, student satisfaction, very high. Students are very positive. I've shared some of the feedback, and again, thank you to Studiosity for giving us access to that. Anything, I think, we know the importance of students' confidence, and particularly confidence and how it plays into persistence. The lessening anxiety, increasing student resilience, giving students the opportunity to access this anonymously from their peers and from teaching staff, I think, is also a really important aspect of that. I think it is important that students are able to seek help whenever they need it, and reducing anxiety, increasing confidence is such an important part of encouraging them in their learning and encouraging them to persevere. So if I just pick up on a few things about some of the things that are working and that work for students. As I said, we know, and I'm putting this in a very high-level colloquial way, students who have been using Studiosity services do better. While they're diverse in terms of their GPA, their ATAR and their socioeconomic background, so there are not clear characteristics, we do believe that Studiosity is meeting demand that we would not be able to meet ourselves. There is no way that within a university's own resources we would be able to provide the extensive, always-on services that Studiosity have made it possible for us to offer to our students. But as as I said, we might have come late to evaluating Studiosity, but we will continue our evaluations. We will continue to look at the influence on retention and progression rates. And I should say we've had a very big retention progression project underway since 2017 in the university. And these services have certainly contributed to the improvements that we've seen in students' retention and progression rates. We'll continue to have a look at the characteristics of users and how they do relate to the outcomes. We're really interested in understanding more about the different users for the two services, the ways they use them and the impact that this has, and doing more work around analysing the qualitative feedback. We'll continue to do more integration of the Studiosity support services with the broad range of other support services that we offer, make it more discoverable for our students, continue to make it as easy as possible for them to access. We will do stronger promotion of Connect Live because it's available at that point of need. It alleviates anxiety for students. And we'll continue to use Studiosity data to improve the development of unit level, so components of our units of study, but also the ways in which we interact with our students and how we direct them to different support services. So I'll bring that to a close so that we still do have around about 12 minutes for some questions. So I'm going to thank everybody. I hope there's some things in there that are interesting. We do have more detailed data. But Judyth, I'm going to hand back to you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Denise. And I think that we were all really engaged with the story that you told. And I guess what you provided us with was a long-term story of a partnership between two organisations, one commercial and one educational. But both of us had the great aspiration of improving student success and student life. So I think the story from Western Sydney is inspirational. But you also talked about that Studiosity became part of the network of student services across the university. Could you just give us a little bit more information about how you manage that integration and articulation of services?
Thanks very much, Judyth. And I was just, as you were speaking, I was looking at the questions that had come in. And I did see a question about mistrust, about loss of study smart. Look, I think these data, to start with, have shown that we weren't going to lose jobs. That this was an addition. I was always really concerned that in a medium to large size university with a lot of students who do come from non-traditional backgrounds, that there was always going to be way more demand for services than we could meet. We're a university operating on a limited budget. I had to stretch my resources as far as I possibly could. And I didn't want to put our own staff under undue pressure because I know the staff who work in support services areas are deeply committed, and they're deeply committed to our students and to the university. So I did always begin, and when I say I was working collaboratively with my colleagues here, but we did begin from a point of saying what we want to do is expand the range of services. We want to build it out. We will continue to grow the services that we have on campus. And they have continued to grow. We continue to refine them and to offer them in different ways. But we also, I think our first year, so 2016, it was an early learning year for us. We put the Studiosity services in place and they kind of hung out there on their own. Students couldn't always find the services. There was a little bit of brand confusion for them. So in a way, it absolutely made sense to integrate everything we were offering students into our Study Smart. It meant we could give students a more consistent message. It meant it was going to be easier for the students to locate the support services rather than having to search their way around multiple layers of the university website. So the idea of pulling them together We are continuing to integrate them, so it's not perfectly integrated yet, Judyth. We've still got a bit of a way to go, but making sure that every service talks to each other. And that's, again, where I think the advisory group has been playing a really critical role. It meets regularly, if not frequently. It is a formally constituted advisory group, so we keep minutes. There are actions. We expect people to report back on those actions. And it's been a great way for all of the stakeholders from the university, the college, Studiosity, our support services, the library, our Learning Futures team, to share the experiences and to share developing solutions to the challenges that we face. Sorry, that was a long answer.
And just continuing on the evaluation, were there any surprises? Was there anything from the data that came up that you thought, wow, that was unexpected?
Look, there were a few things that came up that were unexpected, and I picked up on a couple of them. I think we might have all fallen into the trap here of assuming students who were going to access Studiosity were going to be students in greatest need. And really, on reflection, all of us who have ever worked in any kind of student support know that our high-performing students access support services too because they want to do well. And certainly, Studiosity support services have been well used by quite a significant number of our really high-performing students. And it's because they want to do even better. They want to get their grade point average as high as they can. What else was I surprised? We were surprised about. As I said, a little surprised around the difference in international student number usage. But again, as I said, proportionally, it's pretty representative of the distribution across the university. I think I was very surprised at the low level of overlap between users of Studiosity, so the online support services and the on-campus support services. I think, well, if COVID-19 hadn't interfered with this year and moved us all off campus and everything online, it's something that we'd certainly be looking at a lot more. I think we'd like to see our students moving seamlessly between all of them, but I'd like to understand what it is that actually motivates students to use a particular service. I do expect that all of us who know about how many assignments get lodged online at 1 minute before the final submission time will probably expect that students love Connect Live because they can get in there at the last minute, they can get an immediate response. But then students who really are, well organised, well planned, can take their time and go through it. I was looking at some of the questions as well, and somebody has asked usage data figures, distinct student numbers or interaction numbers. In our report, we provide examples of both distinct student users and numbers of interactions, and we've certainly done some analysis around that as well. What were the key levers that allowed us to bring multiple stakeholders on board? Some of the key levers, some of the levers were a little bit about change, about locating. So I should say, when I was the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, I was fortunate to have a number of the support services in the complete portfolio, if not necessarily in all in the one work unit. So partly it was working together across the portfolio of the DVC Academic, but we also had a very, very strong collaboration with the portfolio of the Vice President, People and Advancement, which is where all of our student services sit. And it was our commitment, I'd say from the two Vice Presidents' perspective, that our portfolio should work very closely together. Certainly helped. We had a strong spirit of collaboration and collegiality among our colleagues. And the one thing I will always say about my colleagues at Western, everybody at Western is so deeply committed to the success of our students. And it's great to see that people will work across organisational structures and boundaries. when what they want to do is give our students the best possible experience.
So there's a question also on most common users and highest proportion of users. What's the difference between those two categories?
Sorry, definitional difference, or
yeah,
what were the...
Yeah, I think definitional and practical.
Okay, hang on, I've got to find that question. And
it's David Curtin.
Let me find, there, common users. Yeah, so what we did was most common users was when we just did a count of the sample. So of all of the users, you know, most frequent. And then highest proportion of users, we did a little bit more analysis just to see how they were represented proportionally. And we can share, I mean, I think we can share a little bit of these data later on.
So you want to answer the question from the Macquarie?
Macquarie one, longer-term partnerships, studios were, oops, hang on, somebody just moved it. However, to your knowledge. Okay, I'm going to try to do this in a way that doesn't seem like a promotion. We, of course, yes, we did look at other service providers. When we went with Studiosity in our longer term partnership, we did a full evaluation of every competitor, can I say that, Jack? Every competitor product in the market at the time. We had a set of criteria for evaluation. And so I will say, while I began this by saying we've had a long and very positive relationship with your tutor, you know, it was our responsibility to do the due diligence and to make sure that if we were committing university funds to a long-term partnership, that we were committing those funds to a partnership with a service and product that was, from our point of view, the best in the market and the best fit for us. So I won't name the others that we looked at. So apologies, Anonymous at Macquarie. But we did a very rigorous evaluation, and when I say very rigorous, it was not just conducted by my team, it was conducted by effectively our third-party procurement team at the university.
Okay, what have you found to be the most effective way to promote the service to students so that they can discover and ultimately try and use it long term?
Yeah, it's, as I indicated, that promotional piece is a challenge. We're still learning and we're still developing some new ways of doing it. And I know my colleagues at Studiosity will remind me about just how important visibility and discoverability is on our website. And through this process, we went through a rebrand and we went through a website rebuild that for a little while shifted the visibility. And that certainly had a negative impact on use. So making it as visible as possible everywhere you can. We make it visible not only on the website, as I said, it's visible through our learning management system, so all our students view sites. It's promoted at things like orientation for our students. It's promoted around campus. It's promoted by many of our academics. As I said, one of our academics built it in to the teaching. We're looking at other ways in which it might be embedded in the teaching. I've always been a very strong believer that if we can embed learning assistance and study support in the learning that students are doing at the time, it has the potential to be much more effective, but we also recognise that there is a really high level of need for that just-in-time as well as just-in-case support that we provide for our students. And it's about educating people about it as well. So making it visible to our staff so that our staff can refer our students to it. I think that somebody said, is there any initial pushback from academics? Generally, look, there are always some of my colleagues who are resistant to something that's new. But again, generally, most of our academic colleagues want their students to be as successful as possible. Many of my academic colleagues recognise that they don't have the skills and background to be able to provide the sort of specific support that we do provide, either through some of our other study support on campus or through Studiosity online. So, you know, generally, I think it's our responsibility to make it as easy as possible for our academic colleagues to understand what services are available and to refer our students to them. So, you know, like many of you, we often will help our colleagues out even by something as straightforward as creating a slide for them that they can put up in their first class in first year, telling students where it is, putting a link to Studiosity in the Views site so that when students go in for their very first induction sessions, they're directed to the support that they know or that they might need. Putting it, kind of embedding it in students' thinking as well. They might not remember it immediately, but when the time comes, they'll think, oh, somebody told me something about this earlier on. Oh, if I go back, I can find it. So, you know, we keep doing as much as we can around promotion, but we can't promote in isolation. We do have to work with our colleagues, not just put it out there and expect they're going to encourage students to use it as well. I think I kind of picked up on answers to a couple of questions that have come up.
And look, I think that it's now 12:32.
Okay.
And this was from 11:30 till 12:30. And I think we could have continued with questions for quite a while, but it certainly indicates the level of interest and engagement that people have had with your presentation today. And thank you for making time to talk with us today, but also your contribution, your continuing contribution to higher education. Can I remind people that next week we have on the 28th a presentation from our colleagues from Edith Cowan University, and if it is as good as yours, it will be another fantastic experience. So Denise, thank you. Be safe and be well.
Thank you. My pleasure. And thank you all very much as well. Thank you.